All right. Hello, everybody. Good to see you virtually. Hopefully you are all a little bit more relaxed at wherever you are instead of in the class. So today we are going to be starting a conversation about creating your own assessments. Everything, or largely what we've spoken about so far, has been the out-of-the-box assessment, or typically given through a curriculum or from a well-established curriculum-based assessment. So the amount of teacher input that goes into what we've spoken about so far has been relatively small. It's more been about like, what are we looking for and how are we going to be doing those assessments. But I did want to make sure that we spend a little bit of time talking about the different types of or what goes into making your own assessment, because it's definitely going to be the case that during your career as a teacher, you will be asked to make some assessment in some way. If you go all the way back towards the beginning, when we spoke about what are the different types of assessments or what are the different ways that you can assess, one of the things that we established was that anything can be an assessment, right? So as something as simple as asking a question to your class has the opportunity to serve as an assessment. I am not saying that every question that you ask your class, one, has to serve as an assessment. Two, even if you are using it as an assessment, it must follow all of these rules that we're going to be talking about. But these are good guidelines. And when you're putting together things like an exit ticket or a bell ringer, or you do have some sort of sequentially based intentional questions that you are going to be asking with assessment in mind. These are going to be good thoughts to follow. And definitely, if you are going to be creating your own curriculum-based assessment or curriculum-based measurement, you are going to want to keep these things in place. So what is the purpose of having rules unquote, for these types of questions? So first of all, we are going to be going over two primary and one secondary type of assessment item. We're going to be talking about creating selected response questions, or multiple choice and binary choice questions, binary choice being like true, false. We're going to be talking about constructed response questions, so short answer, fill in the blank, all the way up to about essays. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about what we call performance assessments, or assessment items that are larger in scope, definitely going to be things that are assessed through rubrics. Think projects, think construction of things, think activities, these non-paper and pencil style assessment opportunities that we're going to be looking for. So why is it that we need to have any sort of guideline in terms of the construction of the question itself? Why do you guys think it might be important for there to be some sort of guideline? What do you guys think? What is the significance about a rule to the construction of a multiple choice question?
I find it helps keep things streamlined so you won't get bogged down trying to decide what exactly you're going to do. Like, if I was given ultimate freedom to construct something, it would take me too long.
Good. So, when you're thinking about, and multiple choice, which we're going to get into in a second, is a good place to start. But when you're thinking about what multiple choice options should you put, the world is your oyster, right? If there are no rules, you can literally put anything down. And you're hopefully, the mindset that you have is going to be, what are the best answer options I can put? And this also applies to constructing the question itself, but what are the best answer options that I can put to make sure my student knows the material, right? Let me ask you guys this. If I say you're taking a multiple choice test and you're not sure of the response, or you're not sure of the correct answer, that there are two things that I think that you should do. What are those? Let's see if you guys can get those two things. How are you going to answer that question? Let's see in the chat. Oh, okay. All right, that's fine, Garrett. So I'm taking a multiple choice test. I get to a question. I don't know the answer. There are a couple of things that we are always told as students to do if you get to a answer you don't know on multiple choice. What are those things?
Trial of elimination.
Okay, so usually it's cross out the two that are obviously incorrect, right? So there's this built-in assumption that that there are two obviously incorrect choices. There's one other thing that most people are generally told. Let's say you don't even know which ones are the obvious choices. What should you do? Someone get this. I hope someone gets this. Okay, you're thinking, I appreciate the way you're thinking, Destiny. I'm thinking sillier than that. Bubble C, excellent, perfect, Destiny. That's it. So we are told, if you're not sure, pick C, right? Does anyone else remember that? All you guys have your cameras off, so I can't see you. But that's what we're told, right? So it's cross out the two you're not sure, and if you can't even do that, then pick C. So when it comes to a teacher teaching how to take a test or identifying what to do, there are these problems because if those are the things that we're doing, those are decisions that are not based anywhere near the material. And as a result, we as a teacher can't analyze those types of responses, right? If now look, if you just don't know, great. That should be apparent. But our challenge as teachers is to find the responses that are going to give us the most information that we can possibly use to use these questions as assessment and make decisions about where we're going to go. All right, so we are looking for ways to construct questions in meaningful ways, including those answer choices that allow for us not to just understand whether or not our children know the material, but rather if they don't know the material, why they're getting it wrong. Okay, so that's going to be our goal with creating our own assessment questions. All right, so if you're following along with the slides, I'm actually going to skip the first few questions. These are all review in some way. We're going to get to this, I think it's like the fifth slide here, the assessment item general guidelines. So these are guidelines that are going to largely apply to both constructed response and selected response questions. And then we're going to go through those individual types of questions themselves. All right. So as you are creating your assessment items, there needs to be an understanding that your goal overall is twofold. One, give your students an appropriate opportunity to demonstrate knowledge. And two, make sure that if they do not get the correct answer, you have some information regarding how to help them. Notice I did not say your goal is to trick your children. Notice I did not say your goal is to make sure that every child passes. I did not say your goal is to make sure that they feel good about themselves. Assessment is all about analysis. And analysis doesn't happen with a correct response. Analysis happens with an incorrect response. And that incorrect response is only analyzable to the degree that you allow it to be meaningful. All right. So what are we going to do? We want to make sure that we have clear directions for all our questions. That can be clear directions about what you're supposed to do on the assignment. That can be clear directions in terms of the question. It can be clear directions about the type of response that is expected. I know I am guilty of not always providing clear directions. And the more unclear my directions, the more emails I get, right? The more unclear your directions, the more questions you are going to get from your students. So you want to make sure that your directions are as clear as possible. You want to avoid ambiguous statements. You want to make sure that your children really understand what the question is. There's a lot of times when we get to assessments that we have this propensity to make statements that, especially for something like fill in the blank, that a child has to fill in. That's a challenging thing in and of itself. And it can be ambiguous as to what it is that we're actually asking the child to do. We want to make sure we avoid unintended clues. An unintended clue is something that that prevents us from ascertaining true knowledge. All right. We'll talk about what those are for the different question types. Complex syntax and difficult vocabulary. This goes back to ambiguous statements. This goes back to not trying to trick our children. This goes back to making sure that we are assessing, or this goes to making sure that we are assessing what we want to actually learn about our students, as opposed to testing whether or not they understand the direction. Bottom line here, make sure that you are assessing the actual information related to the assessment item. You're not assessing whether they understand what's expected. You're not assessing whether they understand what you're going for. Make sure they don't understand, or you're not assessing whether or not they have the highest understanding. You want to set the bar such that any amount of understanding can be demonstrated, but the ability to expand that to higher levels of understanding as possible. All right. So what are the first types of questions that we're going to talk about? We're going to be talking about selected responses. That's going to be all day today. And these are going to be the, hang on, there we go. Hang on one second. Back. Okay. So the types of selected response questions are binary choice, which is true, false, multiple binary choice, which I'll explain when we get there, multiple choice, which we know there's actually a multiple choice, which is annoying, but it's there. And then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about matching. All right. So all of these are different types of selected response questions that we are familiar with, that we've seen. They all have pros, they all have cons. But there's more that goes into them than we typically think. All right. So binary choice. As we go through binary choice, we are going to be talking about, or we're going to be looking at rules that apply to binary choice questions that also end up applying to many of the other different formats. All right. So quite simply, to start, these are yes, no, true, false, correct, incorrect. For our younger students, these are happy face, sad face. You just circle the one that applies as best it can. All right. This is an extremely common type of question, and while there are pros to it, there are some significant cons. And I would argue that there's a much heavier reliance on true false than we typically, than there should be. All right. So what are some of the obvious pros to true false? One, or to binary choice, it's very easy to understand the format, right? When you're talking about clarity of direction, the fact that we can ask these types of questions very easily, all the way from, honestly, a preschool age all the way up through adult, we're still asked binary choice questions. There is very little, if any, ambiguity in the format itself. So that is a good thing. You can cover a lot of material very, very quickly. It's very easy to get through a significant number of true false or binary choice questions if you're trying to assess as much information as possible. And given that, if you have, let's say you have a 100 question true false assessment, a student who gets 100% on that really knows their stuff, right? Jumping down to the obvious cons, there's any single true false item, you have a 50-50 shot of guessing correct, right? The chance of getting a 50-50 shot right 100 times is very, very, very small. So you can cover a lot of material. If you do cover a lot of material and you get accurate responding, then you are more than likely still demonstrating true knowledge, all right? However, anything below, I don't know, 85, 80%, you're starting to get into that gray area of you can guess correctly 80% of the time on an extensive true false exam. So there's become some obvious cons. Any individual question, there's a 50-50 shot. It doesn't necessarily require any one item doesn't require true knowledge. And the questions themselves, just because the answers are boiled down to just this yes or no, doesn't require any thinking, right? It's just either it is the thing or it is the thing. So there are some, hang on, let's see. Okay, there's some logistical benefits to it. In terms of analysis, it's a little bit harder to discern some really good meaning from that. I'm going to go to the next slide because I think the things that I want to say about these are on the next slide, but I may come back in a second. All right. Okay, so I would argue that, relatively speaking, the arguments for multiple or for binary choice are relatively weak. But given that, or despite that, because there are arguments for it, there are things that we want to make sure that we do if we are putting those in, right? And we'll also talk about some of the situations in which binary choice might be the actual good or right place to start. So number one, you want to phrase items to actually require careful analysis. Notice I still did not say trick your students. So we're looking for how can we write our true-false questions that forces our students to analyze. Number two, avoid negative and double negative statements. That should come pretty obviously. Number three, focus on one concept at a time. This is where we get into trouble, and we'll see what that means in a second. Don't create patterns and keep item length similar for both types of categories, all right? So phrasing items that require careful analysis. We want to avoid, in general, we want to find the questions, if we are going to use binary choice, we want to find the questions that are worth asking that are still worth asking, that are going to require some level of analysis. Again, our goal is not to trick the students, but we also want the students to have to think, and we want the child to be able to demonstrate something, or demonstrate some amount of knowledge. So let's look at the bottom of this slide. I have a true-false question. I have 3 separate true-false questions. And I want your guys' opinion as to which of these you think is the best question for, let's call it, a late elementary school grade, so like 5th, 6th grade. So if I'm asking, which of these 3 questions would I have on an assessment? Number 1, the earth is flat. Number 2, and 5th or 6th grade might be a little late, maybe 3rd or 4th grade, that's fine. Some people used to believe the earth was flat. Or number 3, if you were living in the 15th century, you would believe the earth was flat. Now, keep in mind, all of these can be answered as either true or false. But in my mind, there is one clear option here that is a better question than the other 2. What do you guys think? Oh, you guys with your cameras off, I'm assuming you're still there.
Some people used to believe the earth was flat.
Okay, good, Taylor. Why do you think that, what do you like about that question?
I like, because I mean, it's the most accurate one. If you use if you were living in the 15th century, you would believe the earth was flat. That's not necessarily true. They may have some people back then who didn't believe the earth was flat, and they may not, that's a little objective, but some people used to believe the earth was flat. That's pretty like straightforward, clear, and is just pretty accurate.
Okay, good. What else? And agree, disagree, doesn't matter. What do you guys think?
I find a few of them are a little bit vague. The last one I like. So this is a true or false scenario.
Yeah, so it could be either true or false, right? So those are both perfectly.
So I would probably go for the last one because it's the most specific, I guess. Like the earth is flat, that is common knowledge. That's not something you should be asking. Some people used to believe that the earth was flat. That's also, you could point out one person in existence who believed that the earth was flat and it would be true. But the last question is more historical based and has more of a basis in reality. Like, for example, most people in the 15th century knew that the world was not flat because that had been proven. Of course, if you were like a peasant in in a less scientifically inclined nation, then you might not know, but it's more of a specific.
Okay, good. So I actually, the amount of talking that you just did relative to that last question, that's exactly, and the way that you arrived at your answer is exactly why I don't think this is the right question, right? One, it is ambiguous, right? If you were, so the answer is false because some people believed it and some people didn't. And the issue there is if you put true, if you get it wrong and you put true, I, as the teacher, don't know which part of that you don't know is true. There's so much happening in there that I lose my ability to analyze whether or not, like what part of this question you don't understand. I agree with you, Seth. The first question is too basic, right? If I'm asking that this in the context of this assessment, fictitious assessment that I've just given, that is too basic a question to answer, right? That is a totally appropriate question to ask for a preschooler, kindergartner, but for any sort of higher level assessment item, that's not an appropriate question. Taylor, I agree with you. The second question is the best of these three questions. And the reason for that is it's simple. You have to know something, right? You have to know that people used to believe the earth was flat. The sum allows for truth. If I had said all or no, that would be false. So I can switch that one word and have it go either way. And most importantly, it only assesses one thing, which is what we are going to look at. So your multiple choice questions here, you are not looking for the most straightforward, easiest, basic knowledge. You may have those types of questions as warm-ups, and that's totally fine. But you're not expecting to get any sort of analysis out of that type of question. In that type of scenario, you're really assessing, does my student have even the prerequisite knowledge to do the rest of the assessment? That's something different than what we're looking at here. For this second one, you have to know something, and it's going to make your student think a little bit. If I'm asking that third one, I'm bordering into the area of tricking my students. Because, well, if you were here, or you lived here, or you were a peasant, or you were a noble, like there's all these conditionals that are going to confuse your student, as opposed to just the straightforward knowledge.
I find
this is not to say that the go ahead.
Okay, I'm sorry for interrupting you. I find a slight rewording or structuring of it could fix the problems with it. Like if you were to say like true or false, humans had discovered that the earth was round by the 15th century. Like something like that. But I find it's interjecting a person into it. You would believe. That's what.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. I think there are ways to get that same content for a true false question that would be appropriate. If you were living in the 15th century, you believe the earth was flat. While I don't like it as a binary choice, I might like that exactly as like an essay. Write an essay from the perspective of someone in the 15th century or earlier, whatever, I made that up, who believed the earth was flat. Okay, so there are opportunities where you can try to get that even further critical analysis for more challenging questions, but I don't think it's appropriate in the context of true false. So you're looking for what I'm getting at here is you're looking for straightforward questions that still require analysis. With true false, there is a tendency to kind of go one or the other way, either ask something that's too easy or too complex. And there's very much a Goldilocks opportunity here where you can have a true false question that is worded just right. All right. Okay. Avoiding negatives and double negatives. So the double negatives, that should be obvious. However, the negatives are one that we see often that I don't think are a good way to assess true false questions. All right. The American colonies did not want to separate from England. Right. It is not a complex question. If you saw that question on or if you wrote that question into your assessment, no one would bat an eye. We're very much used to those. But that not puts for a level of thought that is not assessing what you want to assess. I can ask this question as either a true statement or a false statement, the use of the word not. And that the absence of that not is going to make the statement much more clear and more easily able to analyze. So I can say the American colonies did want to separate from England, or the American colonies did want to remain part of England. All right. So I got a true statement and a false statement without the use of the word not. And those second statements are much more clear, or are clearer than the statement that uses the word not. We see not all the time in multiple choice and in true false. Again, no one's going to bat an eye if you do, but I think from clarity or for clarity from a student standpoint, the removal of the word not makes it easier for them to understand, which means you to analyze. If you have to go back and say, oh, remember, I put the word not here, that doesn't help you. You want them to be able to really, or to be able to assess them really based on that content, okay? And obviously don't use the double negatives for, whoops, clear reasons. Okay. This, I think, is the most important concept of the binary choice rules. You have to make sure that your question focuses on one single concept at a time. There is a very strong tendency to have true-false questions that have blank, 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 and blank, blank, blank. So we are assessing, what we're asking our students to do is analyze the first part, true or false, and the second part, true or false. And then if I have true and true, I have true. If I have true and false, false and true, or false and false, I get false. The problem with that, again, is if the student gets the question wrong, I don't know which part they don't understand. So true or false, ocean water reflects the sky and makes up 50% of the water on Earth. If they get this wrong, I don't know if they're misunderstanding that the relationship between ocean water or the percentage of water on Earth. I've taken out my own ability to analyze questions. My own ability to analyze the question. I can just as easily assess this content with two separate questions in a much clearer way. We have to be able to understand the difference between confusing children and critically thinking. We have to be able to understand that forcing them to think about all these different ideas at once is not analysis of content. There's going to be a time to be able to allow students to analyze and critically think about all these things in one place. But that place is in an essay. That place is in a project. That place does not live in a binary choice or even a multiple choice question. When it comes to those types of questions, we want clarity. We want to make sure we assess content. We don't want to try and trick our students. All right. How many of you have taken an assessment with either binary choice or multiple choice that violates one or all of these rules? I think all of us have probably been there at some point.
Most of my standardized tests.
Exactly, right? And the challenge, so honestly, the reason it works on a standardized test is because no one is going and doing an item by item analysis to see what you as an individual actually know or don't know, right? As a teacher, making your own assessment questions, that's all you care about. I, the teacher, need to be able to analyze what you know or don't know. So while we may be used to seeing that in our standardized tests, they have a different goal. The standardized tests are using, for lack of a better word, they're playing by different rules, right? They're trying to do something different. In a classroom with your 25 students, you want to know, does my child know the content? And if not, why not? So don't take those standardized tests as your model for how you should make these types of questions. Okay. All right, are there any questions about binary choice? You want to, sorry, there was one other thing that I did want to say. You really want to make sure you don't do anything in your questions that gives away the answer. I had mentioned that back here. So with multiple items, don't create patterns. I remember a test or a quiz, I think it was in 8th grade, I believe, where it was like 20 questions long, not very long, all true, false. Every answer was true. Every single one, all 20. What did I do? I answered, maybe I got 18 out of 20 right. I don't remember. But I got to the end. Let's say I got all 20. I got to the end and I said, no way. There's no chance. There's no chance that every single one of these was true. I'm going to pick 2 at random and make them false. That's tricking your students. That has nothing to do with the content. You're not assessing the content. You're assessing their confidence in the content, but that's different than what typically happens. We look for patterns. There's always going to be a degree to which I'm confident on any given question, but I'm going to take those 2 that I'm least confident in, and I'm going to switch them. I'm going to make it fit the pattern that I typically see in an assessment, which is some true, some false. All right. Don't do that to your kids. Go ahead, Seth. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, you saw me switching out there.
That sounds smart.
I find testing confidence makes students far more unconfident about answering, because it makes them question whether every question is a trick or not. And it means that they'll feel uncomfortable anytime they turn in an assessment.
Correct. And I don't know if it's still the case, but when I was taking the SAT, they tried to balance that out a little bit. Again, I don't know if they still do this in either the SAT or the ACT, but you actually got points subtracted for questions that you got wrong, right? So they were trying to remove guessing, which removed the lack of confidence. So they were looking for how many of these questions do you actually have a confident answer for? I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't want my students who have no idea guessing, but if they have an idea, I do want them to make an educated guess because I want that information. I don't care about the grade. I don't care about the point deduction. I want the information that I can analyze so I can teach them at the end of the day. All right. Okay, cool. Any questions about binary choice? All right, good. Multiple binary choice. So what is this, first of all? Multiple binary choice, and again, this will apply to multiple choice as well, is a question type where you have what's called a stem or piece of information. And then you have multiple questions based on that STEM. All right. A great example of a multiple binary choice or multiple choice, or two great examples, are social studies, where you have a map and then you have a lot of questions based on that map. You don't have an individual map for every question. You have one map, and you have, you know, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and you have to fill in what they are. That's a fill in the blank for a multiple type question. All right. Is A, California or New York? Is B, Louisiana or Florida? Is C, the United States or Canada? All right. All based on one map of the world. All right. In ELA, when I have a reading passage and there are 6 questions, 6 true, false, or multiple choice questions about that passage, that is a multiple binary or multiple choice, right? So the multiple is referring to the number of questions based off of an information set. All right. So here, an example is I have a data set, 5, 6, 7, 7, 7, 8, 8, 8, 8, 9, and 10. And based off of this one data set, I'm saying true or false. The median is 7.5. True or false. The mode is 8. True or false. The range is 5. True or false. The median is different than the mean. In each of these cases, I'm referring back to this original data set, as opposed to giving a new data set for each median, mode, range, and this last question here. Okay, all the previous rules that we just talked about for binary choice still apply, but this is just asking multiple questions off of one data set. Do you guys think that this is a better question format than binary choice? Is it worse? Is there any difference? Does it not matter? How do you see a multiple binary choice question format fitting into the picture here? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Don't care. What do you guys think?
For me, I remember questions like this either gave me relief or it made me feel anxious depending on the circumstance. Some of the times, like if I had to refer back to one thing, I would get confused as to like, or I'd get anxious if I misplaced the answer in the wrong question, just constantly referring back to each one, going back and forth. And that also had a lot to do with if it was on the same exact page. Like if I had to refer to another page, that made it even way worse for me. But I also found relief because it was like, okay, these questions are also like, they're all pretty much going to be related to one thing. And so I can see more often I felt it was more of a good thing than a bad thing, but it's circumstantial at that point.
Good. Okay. Excellent. What else? Any other thoughts? Some of you that have your cameras off, you still have to speak. Someone volunteer.
I feel like if you don't understand the basic data set that you're given, you might miss quite a lot of the problems. Whereas if they all had a different data set for each one, maybe you'd understand some and not understand others, and you wouldn't miss every single one. Instead of now, you probably would because you don't understand the base data set.
Excellent. So I think that's a really good point, and I agree with both of you. So I'm starting with Taylor's comment. I think that in general, when these are selected appropriately, that relief that you talked about okay, I just kind of have to think about this one thing. It's hard, especially I use the math example here. It's hard to like it takes a lot to work with a data set of any sort, right? A passage, an ELA passage, the map, these types of number sets. It takes a lot of brain power to process all of that. And if you have to do that anew each time, that's challenging, right? That wears your student down. So the more that you can get out of a single data set, the better off you're going, I think, the better off you're going to be. So in general, I agree, Taylor, that these generally make assessments a little bit less taxing on students. Now, to Brendan's point, I think that the accurate concern. The challenge, not the challenge, but the remedy for that is making sure that if you are putting these types of questions, that the data set or the content that you use does not depend on or does not impact the child's ability to succeed in and of itself. So if I'm doing something like mean, median, mode range here, then depending on the range of the number set that I'm working with, there should be no difference between this number set and some other number set. Now, obviously, if I have a data set that's 5 numbers versus a data set that's 10 numbers, I would say that those two things are not necessarily equal. So I may want to do multiple one multiple binary choice or multiple choice with 5 numbers, and one with 10. And then I'm actually evaluating, can you do all of these things with 5 numbers? And then can you do all of these things with 10 numbers? As opposed to saying that here's a median problem with 5 numbers, here's a mode problem with 10 numbers, here's a range problem with 20 numbers, because those are unequivalent data sets. In something like ELA, this can be much more of a challenge, where a passage or 2 passages are not inherently equal. So if I give one passage that is more confusing, then my student might not do as well. Versus another passage that's a little bit easier to understand, that my student might do better. I, as a teacher, would rather assume or rather trust that the 2 passages that I am being told are equivalent actually are equivalent, versus saying, okay, I'm going to give you a page passage and then ask you one question, and then another page passage and then ask you another question, then another page passage and ask you another question. Again, the amount of effort that is going to take, I don't think is additive to the assessment process, right? So Brennan, to that point, in some subjects, I do think you have to, in ELA, you would have to say, all right, this passage is whatever lexile, I have to trust that it's appropriate for my students, and then go from there. And again, what you're asking your child to do is so much work relative to the type of information that you're going to get. Good. So I like these types of questions. I think that they are efficient. I think that they are, again, relatively easy to understand. 4 questions, 6 through 10, please refer to the following passage or to the following graphic or diagram or whatever. I think that these are good. There are definitely drawbacks that you have to consider, but overall, I think this is a good route to go. Okay, cool. Skipping this for right now. All right, multiple choice questions. So I'm going to skip this slide. Multiple choice questions are good. They are made poor, and then they're just kind of tossed aside as easy to grade, right? So there's a good way, there's a lot of quality that you can get in a multiple choice question. There's a lot of information that you can get in a multiple choice question. They are often very poorly constructed. Number one, we're just told pick C. but there are these process of elimination ways to go about it. But honestly, most of the time when teachers put in multiple choice questions, it's simply, this is how I can cover a lot of content with thinking a little bit, that's easy to grade. And as someone who has written my own assessments before, that absolutely happens. Check, 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 minus, 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 whatever, we're done. Okay? But you're missing all the opportunity that a multiple choice question has to offer. All right? What do you guys, so that was a biased statement. That's my opinion. That's fine. Why might I like multiple choice questions so much? What I want you guys to try and predict a little bit. What would I like about a multiple choice question?
It sort of streamlines the process of making a question. Like,
Yeah, go ahead.
it helps you grade it as well, because it's a concise version, and it's easier to grade.
And it's not even the grading part. It's not the grading part. You're right, but it's not the grading part that I like so much about it. Any thoughts on what a multiple choice question allows? I'll put it this way. There's a very clear con to multiple choice, right? You can guess. So we know that. If the child can't come up with the answer on their own, the answer, we'll talk about all of the above and none of the above, but the answer is there for you, right? So that's a con, for sure. But what's good about that? Any thoughts? Someone try.
Rather than like
Okay.
a binary choice where you have either a 50-50 chance of getting it right or wrong, you either know the content or you don't. On a multiple choice, now some of it, like, you can make a guess, but you're not as likely to get it. It's not about like making them guess it wrong, but like if you have the options there for them, they have a better chance of like knowing the content, as opposed to an essay out. You can be technical with that, whereas a multiple choice is like,
Yeah. So the way that I look at that, and you were breaking in and out for me a little bit, but the way that I look at it is you're narrowing the range of thought to the right range of thought. And then from there, you are actually able to analyze thinking to some degree, right? You're removing in a good multiple choice, a well-worded multiple choice question, including well-worded multiple choice responses, you're giving the child the opportunity to critically analyze each of those pieces. Keep in mind, multiple choice often is a set of true-false statements. A, true or false. B, true or false. C, true or false. D, true or false. It's like it's almost its own multiple binary choice question. But when a child gets, assuming they didn't guess, when a child gets a multiple choice wrong, you've given them the way that they are thinking. You've been able to, you're trying to predict the way that children think about things incorrectly, so that you can see, yes, this is how my child's thinking, even though it's wrong. So a simple example of that is, let's say I'm doing a multiple choice math assessment. My question is, what is 6 times 5? There are good choices and there are bad choices. All right. So we know, A is going to be 30. A will be our correct response, not C. I could choose, 15, 30, 45, and 372. Those are 4 random numbers, right? But none of those give me any information about how my child is thinking. However, if my question is 6 times 5, and I have 30, 11, 1, and maybe 32. All right. 30 is the correct answer. 32 is the close in correct or incorrect answer. It just got their fact wrong. But 11 is 6 plus 5, and 1 is 6 minus 5. So if they put 11, I understand they are adding instead of multiplying. If they put 32, I understand they understand multiplication, but they just don't have their facts. If they put 1, that's where they are most incorrect, but it still tells me they're doing an operation. They are subtracting. So there are ways to word your answers that allow you to predict how your child is actually thinking. And from that, and then be able to analyze based on that. So that allows for a relatively rich level of analysis that you don't get even with constructed response questions. With a constructed response, look, if they don't know it, they could write anything. Who knows what they think, and who knows how they got there? And that's a big problem, right? You almost lose the ability to analyze by giving them the freedom of thought. Okay, so let's talk about these a little bit. I'm gonna skip that. I don't like that as much. So we have, some of the same rules that we had before. You want to avoid the negatively stated stems, avoid the knots, which is not true. I don't like those. You want to avoid differing response lengths. I just took a professional development series that had some multiple choice quizzes, and there were 3 options. The first option, I don't remember the question, I don't remember the responses, but the first option, which was not correct, had was like 5 words long. And the second option, which was correct, was like 25 words long. And the third option, which was not correct, was 5 words long. So I didn't have to know which one was correct. It was painfully obvious the one that they were talking about more was the correct choice. And it was. That was a poorly worded question. I didn't have to know the content. I just had to follow the cue of pick the one that has the most words. So you want to avoid those types. Same thing, avoid response positions. Don't just put C. Just don't always make it C. Don't avoid making it C, right? 25% or 20% if you have an E option, all right? Okay, most importantly, with multiple choice, we'll come back to that slide, which gives the answer away. All of the above versus none of the above. Both, neither, are they good? Are they bad? How do we feel, and what should we do? All of the above and none of the above.
I think sometimes they can be beneficial, but if you're going to put all of the above or none of the above, it shouldn't always be the answer. Because I know some people see that answer and they're like, that's immediately the correct answer when it's not always.
Okay, good. So you can use them. You shouldn't always, if they're there, it shouldn't always be the answer. Good. What else? What are our thoughts? Let's talk all of the above first. Is that a good answer choice or a bad answer choice? Should we use that or should we not? Someone tell me your thought.
I feel like it could be kind of a trick question because if like one of the answers is kind of iffy, it'll be hard to like decipher if it's all of the above.
Okay, good, good. Keep going. What else? Let's say you, Summer, do you want to go? Sorry, I jumped to you.
I was just gonna say it could show if the student has like an overall, like a really in-depth understanding of it, but then it can also kind of be iffy if some of the answer choices could go either way.
So here's the challenge with that, with what both of you guys said. If you have an answer choice that can go either way, right? So you have A, B, C, D, and all of the above. You have one answer choice that can go either way. That implies that if you're unsure about that one, that implies that there was some other answer that is correct, or two other answers that were correct. So you actually don't have to know whether that one that you are unsure of is correct, because the first two were already correct. I can't do two choices, so it has to be all of the above. So it actually removes the need to make sure that you know that all four of those ones are correct. You only have to know if two of them are correct. As soon as you see that second one, you know that you have all of the above. You guys see what I'm saying? Does that make sense? So I think there's a problem, an inherent problem with all of the above. Now, there's a way to remedy it, but it's not fun. We'll get to that in a second. What about none of the above?
I personally just don't like that format of question.
That's fair.
Because I find that it's kind of scary, because then it opens like this void of unknowable answers to the question, and you might have an idea of what it is, but then put none of the above out of fear.
What do you guys think about what Seth just said? And this can be from either a student standpoint, you guys like or dislike of this type of question, or a teacher standpoint.
I just like it from like a student's point of view, because I know if not all the questions have it, I'm questioning if that census is different, if it's the right answer or not, and it makes me rethink my questioning skills.
Good, good.
It kind of reminds me of like how some questions can be like, is it always? Like, you know, the difference between never and always. I feel like it plays too much into that.
Okay, good. That absolute, good. So I think you guys have touched on the critical pieces. Number one, none of the above is right, then you have to critically rule out the four that are there. And when you have four options that are well written, that can be a challenge in and of itself. It's like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that none of those four options that I'm not sure about instead of one, right? So you may put it out of fear. If, from a teacher standpoint though, especially if you put none of the above on every single question, so it's always there, which means it's not, Destiny's like, no, I never want to see that. If it's always there, which means it's not always used, that is actually a very good way to allow for critical thinking. I'm not saying that you're love you for it, but it's a really good way to assess true knowledge. Can you critically identify when it's not true? Okay, so all of the above is a problem, because as soon as you see that second one, you don't have to analyze the rest of them. So I, again, as a teacher, lose the ability to know what you know and what you don't know. I just know that you knew maybe 2 of them. All right. None of the above would be preferred if you're going to use it, but use it all the time, and don't make it your goal is not to confuse your children. All right. So you don't have to you make it so unclear for all the different options. Okay. There is a better option than all of the above or none of the above. What might that be?
Whenever you were talking about it, I was thinking about sometimes we have questions where it gives you like more than 4 options, and one is like all of the above, answers A and C, and stuff like that.
I hate those ones. Never do those. Those are just confusing. But you're getting there. Hang on 1 second, guys. 1 second. All right. So what do you guys think? There's one other option that is better than both of those.
The ones where it gives you like 4 or 5 choices and it's like check all that apply.
Absolutely. Checking all that apply or circle all that apply forces you to actually critically evaluate each one. All right. In that situation, none of the above is necessary or should be necessary, because you can confidently know that none of them were correct, right? If you are, the challenge with multiple choice questions is they feel like all are, they feel like I either understand why all of these are correct or incorrect, or I don't get it at all. But when you are able to evaluate each of them individually, that gives you a little bit more confidence. Okay, I just have to think about this one. Then I just have to think about this one. Then I just have to think about this one. Now, obviously, from a scoring standpoint, that can still be stressful, because like, I got to know all 3 of these instead of just whether it's one of them. But that is the best way to assess that kind of knowledge. All right. So when you think of your questions, you're going to want to think of questions that allow for that kind of analysis. You want to think of questions that allow you to see how your children are thinking, and so that you can correct it if they are thinking of something incorrectly. You don't want to just have the throwaway answers. You don't want to have challengingly worded questions. You want them to be straightforward. You want them to be able to analyze. You want them to be able to demonstrate what they know without producing it. That's the purpose of a selected response question. Okay. All right, skipping that. All right, really quickly, let's talk about matching items. And I am not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm just going to say, don't do it. All right. Matching of the 3 selected response or 4 selected response formats. Matching is the worst of those options. All right. Taylor's like, but I love matching. I always use it. What's the biggest problem with matching? There's one glaring issue with a matching question.
Something I can think of is like, if you get one wrong, you obviously get another one wrong.
Exactly. That's it. And then it starts this chain reaction, right? Or has the potential to start this chain reaction. So when it comes to an actual grade and scoring, matching can cause has some inherent problems that, again, are separated from that type of knowledge. You can be very confident in an answer and get it wrong, and then that sets off everything else. Like most of this, though, there is a fix to that. And it's not a fun one from a student's perspective, but it's there. The fix. Any ideas? All answers may be used more than once. Horrible from a student perspective, but it makes matching, effectively what you have at that point is a word bank, right? You have a short answer or or fill in the blank or something along those lines for the word bank. That's effectively what you've turned it into. But again, every answer can be used more than once. So, and there are some other problems that are with that we'll get to next week. But matching, I don't like. Look, no one's going to laugh you out of the building if you put some matching items on an assessment that you make. I don't think it allows the most appropriate type of analysis. This is my catapult. Okay. We are not going to get into our breakout groups today that went all the way to the end of our time. So your assignment for this week is related to what we just did and your previous assessments. So pulling it up on Moodle right now. So using your original math assessment as a guide. Select 5 to 7, doesn't matter how many of that range, assessment items, and rewrite them as selected response items using the rules and guidelines discussed here. All right. Please include both the original assessment item as well as the rewritten assessment item. For each item, describe what you changed and why you changed it. So if you had multiple choice or true false in your original assessment and you want to just reword those, that's totally fine. If you did all short answer and fill in the blank and you're going to rework some of them, that's totally fine. But what I want to see is what you started with, what you ended with, and tell me why you changed what you changed. All right? Sound good?
Are we doing this in our groups?
Yes. So this is in your groups. Similar to last time, do it as a group. Everyone can turn in the same thing as the group. If you want additional information added, then just highlight it. Like this, I added this beyond what my group said or changed anything from what your group said. That's totally fine. Just let me know if part of that was done individually so I can separate it out, okay? And again, in terms of grade for this, I'm grading on terms of completeness, not necessarily accuracy. I'll give you feedback for accuracy, okay? So turn it in and you will get 25 out of 25, I promise. I have the due date as next Tuesday, next Friday rather. That's kind of a soft due date. Get it in around that time. We're going into spring break after that. So, if you need a little bit extra, I'm not going to deduct. Okay. All right. Have a good one, and I will see you all on Tuesday. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.